This is the first time I'm filming since I was sick in Florida, so if my voice just decides that's it for me, then that's it for me, and I'm really sorry. Welcome back to Every Disney Movie Ever. My name is Jess and I'm watching Every Disney Movie Ever. This is the REWATCH series, and today I'm going to talk about Bambi. Bambi is a 1942 animated theatrical release. It's directed by David Hand, Bill Roberts, Samuel Armstrong, James Algar, Graham Hyde, Paul Satterfield, and Norman Wright. Graham and Norman are best known for Bambi and Fantasia, while all the other men I just listed I've covered in previous videos. All links will be in the description. Supervising animators include Ollie Johnston, Milt Cull, Eric Larson, Travis Johnson, and Frank Thomas. Travis Johnson's only credit is Bambi, and all the other men I listed I covered in previous videos. The links will be in the description. The music is by Frank Churchill and Edward H. Plum. Frank Churchill I covered in the video at Santa's Workshop. The link will be in the description. Edward H. Plum is best known for his Disney work, including Dumbo, Bambi, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, etc. The film is written by Perce Pierce and Larry Morey, both of whom I covered in the video at Snow White and Seven Dwarfs. The link will be in the description. The film is based off a book called Bambi, A Life in the Woods by Felix Salten, released in Austria in 1923. Shall we compare? Bambi is born in the spring, and his mother teaches him about the forest, animals, and the way deer live. When he's old enough, his mom takes him to the meadow and warns him against the dangers. When they go to the meadow again, they meet Aunt Enna and her twins, Feline and Gobo. The kids play, and they run into the male deer. When the stags leave, Bambi and the others learn that they were their dads, and the fathers never stay with or speak with the mothers and their young. Bambi continues to grow, and his mother starts to leave him alone. He has his first encounter with man and almost gets shot. The old prince, the oldest and biggest stag, scolds Bambi for crying out for his mother, so Bambi gets used to being alone. In the winter, Bambi makes some friends, Morena, Netla, Rono, and Karis. His mother gets killed, and Gobo disappears and is presumed dead. Then there's a time skip in which Netla took Bambi in and cared for him, and Bambi got bullied for his first pair of antlers. In summer, Bambi is reunited with Feline and fights Karis and Rono, after which Feline and Bambi fall in love. I want to take this moment to remind you that they are cousins, something the movie is very quick to forget. The old prince saves Bambi from a human imitating a deer call. Gobo returns, having been raised by a human. Bambi and the old prince pity him. Gobo mates with Morena, but weeks later is shot by a human he tried approaching. Bambi keeps aging and starts spending more time alone. He meets with the old prince many times to learn different human hunting techniques. Bambi is shot by a hunter, and the old prince teaches him to walk in a circle until the bleeding stops to confuse both the hunter and the dogs. When Bambi is old, the old prince teaches him that men are not all powerful by showing him a dead human body. In the end, Bambi meets twin fawns calling for their mother. He scolds them. After he leaves, he realizes they looked a lot like Feline, and he hopes to meet the male when he's older. I'd say that's a little different. The film stars Donald Dungan, Peter Behn, and Cammie King Conlon. Donald Dungan plays young Bambi and is best known for Son of Frankenstein, Sub Rosa, Mother Carries Chickens, and The Forgotten Woman. Peter Behn plays young Thumper and is best known for this. And Cammie King Conlon plays young Feline and is best known for Gone with the Wind and this. In 1933, Sidney Franklin of MGM purchased the rights to the novel to make a live-action adaptation, but it proved to be too difficult. So he sold to Walt in 1937, hoping Walt would make an animated feature. Walt wanted Bambi to be the second feature to come from Walt Disney Studios, but the original material was considered too grim and too somber, so it was kind of put on hold. In 1939, production began in earnest, but went slowly because of all the drama surrounding the studio, including being brought into the war effort of making propaganda videos and different patriotic videos, as well as the strike at Disney Studios. It all made the production go rather slowly. They had a difficult time honing in on just Bambi. They kept trying to make the story bigger than it was, and they kept having to remind themselves it's about Bambi and Bambi only. It's not about nature itself. Many different ideas were tossed around, including having 6 bunnies like the 7 dwarfs, but then Perce Pierce said no, we should have 1 main bunny and 5 generic bunnies. The mom's death scene was a little bit different. Originally, you were going to see her die and see Man, and Man was going to burn alive by his own fire. It was all toyed with, but they ultimately decided that not seeing Man was really from the point of view of the forest and Bambi, and was really the best route for them. Writing finished in July of 1940, and the budget had increased to $858,000. Animators had to take lessons on how to animate animals realistically. They took a ton of lessons. They observed animals in the zoo. They had a small zoo at the studio. They had experts come in. They also had to study forests in Vermont and Maine. Tyrus Wong, a very background-oriented animator, had this impressionistic style in which it kind of blurred the edges and brought your attention to the center, so it didn't overwhelm the audience with the amount of detail, and that is what they ended up going with. So Bambi's backgrounds are very bring your eye to the focal point, while the other parts might be a little bit blurred. Mark Davis came up with the final design of Bambi. He morphed a young doe or fawn face with a baby to get the expressions they wanted on an animal's face. And Disney had to cut 12 minutes from the film before final animation to save on money. Bambi was released in 1942 with a budget of $1.7 million and only made $1.64 million, making it a loss. It didn't make its money back and is considered a bomb at that time, in that moment. And it also received mixed reviews. There was a big outcry from the hunting community. Even Walt's daughter spoke out and said Bambi's mom's death was completely unnecessary. It also was considered too serious and lacked fantasy, but it also received very positive reviews for the animation and the music. At its subsequent re-releases, it made all its money back tenfold. It has a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes and is now obviously considered a classic. It was nominated for 3 Academy Awards for Best Sound, Best Original Score, and Best Original Song for Love Is a Song. As I'm sure you saw in the thumbnail, we own the 2-disc special edition released in 2005. It looks like this. Has a little story thing. It's in a sleeve. There are 2 discs and a lot of bonus features, quite a long time to watch, actually. On disc 1, the bonus feature that is the only bonus feature on disc 1 is called Inside Walt's Story Meetings. In the video about Pinocchio, I believe, I mentioned how Walt had every single meeting about every movie transcribed, so every word everyone said about the movie is written down verbatim. So for Inside Walt's Story Meetings, basically, they made it they do a reenactment of all of these meetings, and they have it serve as a commentary to the film in some way. So basically, you watch the movie again, pretty much, but they throw in, like, rough pictures and different dialogue and, like, all this kind of stuff. So you're not just, like, watching the movie again, listening to them. They show different things as well. But throughout the entirety of the film, which is an hour and 10 minutes, you get to hear these story meetings reenacted. So you get to hear what Larry and Perce and Ben and Bill and David and Walt are all saying about the film and their different ideas and everything they talk about, you know, including, you know, how they decided that man should never be seen, and a big emphasis on using their music to tell the story and a lot of little dialogue. They didn't want a lot of dialogue, and it was really fascinating to listen to. A lot of the information I've already told you, that is like information you need to know. But if you own this or you have access to like this commentary with Inside Walt's Story Meetings, I suggest watching it. It was hard to watch the movie again right after I just watched the movie. But they really threw in a lot of like bonus, like rough animation sketches. Like they edited it nicely to where you're really focused on what Walt and his fellow filmmakers are saying instead of focused on the movie. And it was really fun to hear their discussion and thought process and what they thought was funny. Like, for instance, there's a lot of gags in the movie, like funny instances, that they took from Pluto shorts. You know, Pluto sliding on the ice, or Pluto pretending, you know, there was just a lot of Pluto-inspired moments in the film that they used on Bambi instead of Pluto. Disc 2 has a ton of special features, the first being deleted scenes. There are 2 deleted scenes. The first, called Winter Grass, in which Bambi is eating grass and offers some to Feline, and then they run off and play. It's a very short deleted scene. The second being an alternate version of Bambi's first snow. Bambi and the bunnies play around in the snow for quite some time, and then they run into Friend Owl or Mr. Owl or whatever the owl's name is, and kind of try to get him to play, and he's like, no way, I'm too old. And then Bambi tries to impress the rest of them by saying he can walk on ice, but he can't, so he slips around, and it's quite a funny gag. I personally prefer the scene that's in the movie. The next section was titled Games and Activities, which is just that, games and activities. The first being the Forest Adventure, in which you go through the forest playing all these mini games. The only one I could get to, because I I was doing this on the computer, which it wants to be in a DVD player with a DVD remote, so it wasn't exactly working for me. But the first game you come to is like a kind of like a Simon Says thing, where you have to watch the order of drops in a puddle and then click the drops in the puddle. Pretty common game. And then you continue games through the forest, like little mini games. The second section in games and activities was Disneypedia, lessons on the animals in Bambi. So it's a narrator talking about different facts about bunnies or owls and deer, etc. Like, you know, it talks about how owls can turn their heads 270 degrees, not a full 360. It was interesting. It's a cute little, short little, like, lesson on all the different animals. The third thing was, what's your season personality profile, where you take a quiz to find out what season you are. Again, this didn't fully work for me because I was doing it on the computer and not on a DVD player with a remote. But the questions were cute, and the questions do change. Like, if you do the quiz more than once, I got different questions because I tried doing it twice. And I got different questions the second time, so that's kind of interesting and cool. The next thing was Disney Storytime, Thumper Goes Exploring, which is kind of like a storybook in which Thumper learns the lesson of responsibility. And the last thing in games and activities is the virtual forest, in which you just watch a tree at the base of like a creek go through the seasons for like 3 minutes. Or 30 seconds. 3 minutes? I think 3 minutes. So it's kind of interesting, and that's the end of that section. The next section on Disc 2 was called Backstage Disney, which had a lot in it, the first being the making of Bambi, A Prince is Born. And they discussed the story and how it's a coming-of-age story most of all, and they compared it a lot to The Lion King. So I can only assume that the interviews were held right after The Lion King came out and was really successful, because they compared it to The Lion King big time. So I don't know what that was about. Because, I mean, they're similar, they're coming-of-age stories, but it was like, they talked about Lion King a lot, and I was like, this is Bambi, what you doing? The next thing they talked about was the animation, and compared the animation of animals in Snow White to the animation of animals in Bambi, and talked about how far they'd come. They talked about the learning and studying animals and etc., stuff I've already talked about. They talked about the voices and interviewed all the voices of the young animals, like the animals when they were young. So Donald and Peter and Cammie were all interviewed and discussed what it was like to be in a classic like Bambi. It was really interesting. Then they discussed the background animation, Tyrus Wong specifically. He was interviewed as well, and you get to talk to him and meet him and how he came to the studio and how he came to be like the main background animator for the film. They also discussed effects and the major effects in the film, like the snow. The snow was a huge deal in Bambi. They discussed the multiplane camera. They talk about the multiplane camera a lot in a lot of the old animated classics, and I think I've discussed the multiplane camera before, but basically it's this giant stack of glass panels that are all painted to be different parts of a background. So you have foreground, midground, and background, and the camera is all the way at the top, and I don't think the camera moves, I think the planes move, and they can roll one way or the other way, and they can push. So as the camera pushes past one glass pane, it like moves through it but doesn't move through it. Just the focus moves through it to the midground and the background, and it was a really great way to get depth. And then they discussed the music and how important the music was, and how the movie's pretty much wall-to-wall music, save for like 2 moments that use silence to their advantage, which was a big deal at the time. And then they kind of discussed miscellaneous stuff that happened before the movie came to be, pretty much. They talked about Walt selling the story. He was so passionate about it and sold it so much. They discussed the book, and they discussed the war. The next segment was called Restoring Bambi, in which Patrick Stewart took us through the restoration process. So Bambi is on old film, and a lot of old film is kind of like gunpowder, and will start to deteriorate and turn to dust and die, if you will. So Bambi was stored in the Library of Congress for a long time, but was eventually taken out so it could be restored. And how they do this is they go over it, each individual frame, to make sure there are no tears, there are no scratches, there's no dust, etc., to make sure it won't get ruined if they put it through a spool of some kind, and then they take it to this big fancy room that ensures there will be no dust. People have to be dressed in these like white clothes. It's so intense. And then it is captured frame by frame digitally onto a computer, in which they restore it. They brighten the colors that have faded to like the original paints that they have from the Disney studio and how vibrant those were. They restore the colors. They get rid of any imperfections that are on the picture. It's a big process, especially when computers were still really slow. But the before and after is kind of cool. There's like a split screen that shows like before and after, and that was really interesting. The next section was called The Legacy Continues, a sneak peek at the new Bambi movie, and it's just that. It's like some behind the scenes looks and interviews at Bambi 2. They show some of the animation comparison. They show an interview with Patrick Stewart because he plays the old prince. It was interesting, but I really don't want to talk about it because we'll get there. We'll get to Bambi 2, you guys. The next section was called Disney Time Capsule 1942, and this was kind of cute. It was like 4 minutes, I think, of what was going on in 1942. So it talked about the war. It talked about how you could buy a house for $7,000. Talked about how you could get a movie ticket for like a quarter. Talked about how Joseph Stalin was Man of the Year on Time magazine. And it talked about Bambi's release. It was, and what people wore, and just like what was a big deal. It was kind of a fun little time capsule moment. And last but not least was a section titled The Art of Bambi, which had different character sketches and production stills and background sketches, and just any art you could imagine was in this section, and it was awesome to see those pictures. After Bambi's release, Disney contracted Bambi to the government for 1 year to help promote forest safety and prevent forest fires, and once that year was up, the Bambi characters were no longer allowed to be used, and that's how Smokey the Bear was invented. Bambi was selected for preservation in 2011, and I have said this about previous films, and some people have asked me what that means, so I decided to actually go a little bit in depth about this so you understand what that means. So there's this thing called the National Film Registry, which was founded in 1988. Because they noticed that a lot of films that were a big deal could deteriorate and die. And so they decided to dedicate themselves to preserving films that are deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. So every year in December, 25 films are selected to be preserved in the registry. The Librarian of Congress and the board all decide based on nominations made by the public. So basically, all year, public, me, you, your friends, make nominations of films we think are culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And the Librarian of Congress and the board meet and choose 25 to be preserved that year. So in 1988 was the first year. That means 2018 was the 30th year. So as of December 2017, there were 725 films in the registry, so I think it's safe to say there are 750 now. And that's kind of the process. So Bambi was selected in 2011. So in December of 2011, Bambi was one of the 25 films selected for preservation. The sequel was released in 2006 and takes place in the middle of Bambi. It's not like a sequel. It's like a midquel. It takes place in the middle of Bambi. So we'll see how that goes when I get to it. I have never seen it. So can't wait to watch that when we get there. The film also had copyright issues with Disney. When the copyright was purchased by Twin Books, they sued Disney, claiming that Disney didn't have the right to distribute it or something, and Disney made an argument that when Twin Books filed for the copyright, it was late, so that made it invalid, and that was upheld until 1996 when the decision was reversed onto Disney. I don't know. In my original video for Bambi, link in the description, I discuss how I used to think Bambi was a girl. Still happens. I still sometimes get confused. I'm sorry, okay? For the longest time, I thought Bambi was a girl. How I thought the music was awesome, how I thought it was amazing, how little dialogue there actually were, and how I thought it was interesting that the females were so forward when in nature it tends to be the males that have to impress the females. So thought all those things were interesting. I only actually have a couple new notes. I don't have a lot of new notes. I think Bambi looking for his mother after she has passed is more sad than her death. I think him being lost and screaming for her is much more sad than her actually dying. To be fair, I don't think her dying is actually that sad. Hot take, I don't think her dying is actually that sad because you don't get to know her very well. So then she dies and you're just like, okay, that sucks. I'm sorry, Bambi, but like I didn't know her, so I don't have a lot of feelings toward it. I discussed how the animation is absolutely stunning, something I already knew, but I just wanted to emphasize how stunning the animation is and how different the animation is in the movie itself. So like the scene where Bambi is fighting that one stag for Feline, that animation is so different than the rest of the film. The winter animation is different than the spring and summer animation. There's just a lot of different animation going on when the stags all enter and there's like all these lights and everything. A lot of different animation going on in the film, which was very cool, and I really enjoyed that. Feline's eye color changes throughout this movie. They start blue eyes, then she's got like this honey yellow eye going on, and then they're blue again at the end, and it drives me insane. Every time I watch the movie, that drives me nuts. All of that said, y'all are gonna be so mad at me, but Bambi is so boring. It's boring. I am never entertained by Bambi. This rewatch series has so far been such an awesome experience because it has allowed me to come away with such a greater appreciation for some of these movies. Like Pinocchio, I never thought in my life I would look back at Pinocchio and think of it fondly and be like, yeah, Pinocchio's kind of fire. But now I look back at Pinocchio and I'm like, Pinocchio's kind of fire. I would watch it. Like if someone was like, let's watch Pinocchio, I'd be like, yeah, let's do it. I wouldn't like be like, oh, Pinocchio, are we serious? Bambi, that didn't happen. And I think because I already knew the music and animation in Bambi was spectacular, I already kind of knew the effort that went into Bambi. And Bambi's just boring. It like, I came away with a greater appreciation of Fantasia just because of the effort and everything that went into that. And there are parts of Fantasia that are so entertaining, but Bambi's just kind of this slow story of Bambi growing up and stuff just happens to him. Like, Bambi doesn't do anything. Bambi just exists. And I think because there's nothing, like, Bambi's not a very active character, I think that's why Bambi is boring to me. That's it for Bambi. I really have nothing else to say. I guess I'll re-rate it if I rated it back then. I don't even know. I'm gonna give it like a 6. Please don't be mad at me. But like 6 deer out of 10, just because it's so boring. But the animation and music really bring it up, so I'm gonna go with a solid 6, I think. Our original movie count is, and obviously this is the first Disney parent death ever, but we've already counted it, so we're not going to be counting it. I did not cry because the movie's kind of boring. I'm really sorry. Okay, so our original movie count we did. Until next time, come like and subscribe, and I'm not sure what you are, see you, and don't be man about it. I forgot to mention that this is one of the few Disney movies that has songs that aren't sung by the characters in the film. I know a lot of people know that, so I think that's why I forgot to mention it.